Greetings, everyone. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights booksellers and publishers and the City Lights Foundation. I'd like to welcome you to the launch party for an important new book. City Lights, in conjunction with Synergetic Press, are pleased to celebrate the publication of 70 Ads to Save the World, an illustrated memoir of social change. It is authored by Jerry Mander. Jerry is a longtime friend of City Lights. We've had the distinct pleasure of having hosted him on numerous occasions. He's been a huge part of the North Beach scene here in San Francisco and played an important role in the cultural and political life of the city. Over the years, we've been delighted in seeing Jerry around the neighborhood, and it's especially meaningful to us to be able to host one of our good neighbors. 70 Ads for Social Change, which, as you see, is a very, very lovely tome, is at once a testimony to a life lived as an activist for social change and a logbook of some of the most successful campaigns launched in support of progressive causes. We are honored to have with us tonight several people who have worked closely with Jerry Mander and have a unique insight into his career and activism. Before we begin, I would like to take this moment, as is customary at the beginning of all of our events, to acknowledge that from our base of operation for this event, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. I would like to take this moment to pay our respects to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Tonight's event will be moderated by Julie Lindow. Julie is a lifelong activist and professional writer and editor. Her past work has focused on environmental and cultural preservation and community building at the Foundation for Deep Ecology, International Forum on Globalization, and Hendlin Center for the Arts. She is currently working with San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. Julie is editor of the book Left in the Dark, Portraits of San Francisco Movie Theaters. A notice of disclosure, Julie is also my wife, so it's a delight to have her here and in City Lights' orbit once again, and especially for an event for Jerry, as there is so much personal linkage for the both of us with him. So before we begin, I would like to let you know we'll be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of 70 Ads to Save the World. Also, we'd like to encourage everyone, please post in the chat where you are Zooming from, how you know Jerry, and a message for him if you wish. We'll be saving the chat for Jerry to keep as a memento after the event. Also, as you listen to the speakers, please do post questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A towards the end of the evening and you can address it to them, but please note that Jerry actually will not be taking questions tonight. I'd also like to encourage you to switch to speaker view to enhance your viewing experience. You may affect that setting from the prompt in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom dashboard. So I'd like to welcome now Julie Lindow to moderate this evening's event.
Thank you, Peter, and City Lights Bookstore and Foundation for hosting tonight's event. It is a huge honor to be here tonight with Jerry Mander, his wife Kuhan Pak Mander, such esteemed speakers from 6 time zones, and with so many people who know and have worked with Jerry over the decades. My first job out of college was as office coordinator for Foundation for Deep Ecology and International Forum on Globalization, where I had the pleasure of working with Jerry and a wonderful team and helping to proofread the Turning Point ads, among many other projects. Working with Jerry inspired me to become a professional editor, and as Peter mentioned, I currently handle communications for San Francisco Bay Physicians for Social Responsibility. Tonight, we're here to celebrate Jerry Mander's new book, 70 Ads to Save the World, his career, and his enormous impact on social change movements. We are going to hear from activists from across the globe whose important work was transformed by collaborating with Jerry. Jerry's book, 70 Ads to Save the World, published by Synergetic Press, is a collection of ads and stories about their creation, an illustrated memoir of social change, an historical record, an inspiring how-to for today's activists, and it reads as if one is sitting at the dinner table listening to Jerry tell his inspiring stories. 70 Ads to Save the World has received many endorsements from prominent activists such as David Suzuki, Maud Barlow, John Kavanagh, Malcolm Margolin, Michael Lerner, Anuradha Mittal, and many more. If you haven't seen the book yet, you can use the link in the chat to purchase it tonight. For those of you who may not know Jerry, I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. Jerry is the founder, former director, and distinguished fellow of the International Forum on Globalization, a San Francisco-based think tank focused on exposing the negative impacts of economic globalization and the need for economic transitions towards sustainable local economies. In addition to his role at IFG, Jerry is the former program director for the Foundation for Deep Ecology and founder and director of the Public Media Center. In the 1960s, Jerry served as president of a major San Francisco advertising company before turning his talents to environmental campaigns that kept dams out of the Grand Canyon, established Redwood National Park, and stopped production of the supersonic transport. He has authored, edited, and co-edited many books, including 4 Arguments for the Elimination of Television, In the Absence of the Sacred, The Case Against the Global Economy with Edward Goldsmith, Paradigm Wars, Indigenous Peoples' Resistance to Globalization, and of course, 70 Ads to Save the World. Now we will watch an introduction to the book filmed by Kuhan Mander and an interview conducted with Jerry on October 3rd. Peter, I hand it back to you.
Jerry Mander was an advertising executive during the 1960s in San Francisco. Inspired by the city's counterculture, he broke ranks to open the first advertising agency for nonprofits like Greenpeace and the Sierra Club. There, he pioneered a style of advocacy advertising that later became his trademark, the full-page ad. Full-page ads with zinger headlines and volumes of text may be absurd to today's messaging experts, but Mander's ads had the power to change the world, or at least stop a dam from filling up the Grand Canyon, or save dolphins from tuna industry massacres. Over 3 decades, Mander and his colleagues churned out hundreds of full-page advocacy ads. Now, 70 of his favorite ads have been compiled into an amazing graphic memoir called 70 Ads to Save the World, published by Synergetic Press. The collection, along with Mander's personal stories, embody a colorful, original history of the progressive movement and the history of advertising itself.
Well, I think I moved from commercial advertising to nonprofit advertising, political-oriented advertising, because that's what I cared about far more than the profit world. Well, I got into it through my partnership with Howard Gossage. You know about Howard Gossage, don't you? Or if your audience doesn't, he was a great advertising genius back in the 1950s and 60s. And I got connected to him in those days by various means. And he asked me to come work for him, work in his advertising agency, and to also to work with the organizations that I was so involved with, the political organizations and environmental organizations that I was involved with. So he was encouraging me to do environmental advertising and indigenous voice advertising, and that he would participate with me, and he was a great participant and had great ideas on what to do. So I got into it really because he and I were both passionate about it. He had been in commercial advertising for a very long time, and deeply favored doing things that had a political and emotional and psychological benefit to the world. And so we got along very well, and then he asked me to join his agency, and then I joined his agency, and the majority of my work was not commercial work for corporations. It was mainly doing many more nonprofit campaigns than anyone has ever done, as far as I know, in advertising. And so, and he helped me figure out how to get funders to pay for them and things like that. And we had a great time. It was wonderful. And I got hired by a guy named Alan Meyerson. The committee opened on Broadway in San Francisco as satirical comedy, and they wanted to reach through to a public that would be interested in satirical comedy and also would be engaged in movements that connected to the comedy work that they were doing. And so Alan Meyerson came, he was the director of the committee, and he came to see me and asked, could I help them? Could I help promote that? And I loved that. I thought it was so wonderful. And Alan Meyerson was a wonderful guy. He was the head of the committee, and he was greatly helpful in how to think about some of these campaigns. And my job was to translate his ideas into advertising language and make it effective for various clients that we had. So I think just being around all the committee people who that was their job too, was to take events in the world and ideas that were developing in the world and make them funny and fun and deliverable to a wide audience so that they could move the issues more quickly and more effectively. And so I learned a lot about how to communicate difficult ideas by working with the committee, Alan Meyerson, Larry Hankin, and Scott Beach, and so many other people. If you hear that sound, that's a bird that's here in this room. That's called me up one day and came to my office, and we met at the committee, in the lobby of the committee. And he told me he had some campaigns that he really wanted to do, and he needed to break out from the usual way of doing these things so that he could reach a broader public and also initiate engagement so that people would respond and get involved in movement building, you might say. And that he loved the committee. He would come to the shows and watch them and thought it was really great. But so he and I began to work on campaigns together. It's just at his urging that happened. He was a very important person in getting me into advertising, actually. I do think the ads we did in those days, first with David Brower, and then in general with activist organizations of all kinds, made a big difference because we found a medium to use and a way of expressing the issues that had not been used before. And so it was reaching directly to the general public, and the public could respond by sending money so we could do it again. So we had a very big following in those days. And the committee theater, we helped really generate that audience for that as well, because the actors and so on from the committee theater were part of the ads in some cases. And we had a very great collaboration going, and everybody was having a good time with it. So it was It was wonderful. And the ads were very effective in those days. You know, you always had to have a headline that was going to be engaging, and that was always the most important thing. And all of my ads were long copy. I didn't do short, visual short ads. So I did a few of those, but not many. And they were mainly long copy, meaning you had to explain a complicated subject in the ad and get a reader engaged sufficiently so that they would enter the ad and then get connected up to the subject. So all the work was really focused on how to do that, on how to attract the attention of a public and then give them something that they could do, which would be an expression of their engagement. And then once they were engaged, once they had one foot in, then you drag them through the language, and then they learn more about the project and what's going on. And hopefully you're helping to build a movement. The thing that you want to promote and move through the broader system is the indigenous viewpoint and the indigenous role. And that's the thing that most Americans don't know a fucking thing about. They just have no idea where that's coming from or what it all means, or the connections to a wider way of thinking, or the connections to religions and so on. So I think it's very, very important to always, in any campaign that you work on, assuming it's a campaign, you have multiple opportunities, very, very important to express the indigenous perspective in some way that makes it more appealing to a general public and allows them to engage in some way. And I'm always interested in doing that. I always think that that's very, very important. The indigenous perspective is more difficult to convey in our society, which has so much invested in technology and growth and individual wealth and money and stuff like that. Whereas one of the great things about the indigenous perspective is that those are not the roots of those actions. The indigenous perspective is really interested in worldview, experience, community, organization, historic promotion and maintaining historical connections and so on. And the reason I spent more time on the indigenous was that I felt like that wasn't being heard at all, and that it was very, very important to broadcast the indigenous perspective in a way that it can be understood by the non-indigenous and expand their possibility of moving forward as a result. I met him in the 1960s, and I was very interested in his work. I think the first time I met him was actually via the committee, the theatrical review, the committee, and some people who were active there who were connected to him and knew him and so on. And they opened up those gates, and we wound up hanging up together. But we never really got very close. But I was always a great fan of his, and he became a supporter and a verbal, he would outline his support for the various campaigns that we were doing. And sometimes he'd be quoted in some of the ads, and I would arrange for him to have press conferences and so on. I think the whole neighborhood, all the way up Grant Street, City Lights bookstore, the Committee Theater, Cafe Trieste, and it'd be a constant stream of people chattering away with each other back in those days. I don't see it happening now anymore. But back then, I think that there was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm for coming up with change and so on. And City Lights bookstore probably gets more credit than any other place in terms of being a home to movement building. I mean, Enrico's was a kind of broad, it was expensive to go to Enrico's, but people would always go and have a good time. And the Cafe Trieste was another very, very important one. And but North Beach in general was the heart of the world, you might say. It was a place where things happened better and faster and sooner than anywhere else at that point. It may probably still true, I don't know. Well, it was just that Warren Hinkle and I were sitting around Enrico's in San Francisco. For anybody who doesn't know, San Francisco is a very popular open cafe. It's open in the middle of the day and people love it. We were sitting having lunch and just chatting and being good friends. Warren Hinkle was the publisher of Ramparts magazine and many other great things. And, we tried to think of how to move the movement forward a little bit. And then in walks Alvin Duskin to the restaurant, and we sit down and we have some ideas, some campaign ideas. And he starts laughing because we ask him for $30,000 right on the spot at lunch at Enrico's. And he laughs for a while and then says, okay. And so that started many of our campaigns. And he gets tremendous credit for that. And he just did it like that on the spot without even thinking about it. And he wasn't a super wealthy guy. He was just tended to be very engaged on some of these issues. And he thought it was terrific. And he became the spokesperson on many of these issues and very successful. The ad ran. Herb Caen made a big deal about it. Herb Caen, for those who don't know, it's a very celebrated columnist that almost everybody read every day. And he made a big fuss about what we had said about Alcatraz. And then I think it was only one day later, or it could have been 2 days later, a whole bunch of indigenous people went out to Alcatraz and said that they were taking it over again, and that it's indigenous property, and that they weren't going to leave. And they went through the whole political history of it and so on. They were very, very, very smart and very together and successful, because Alcatraz was then not developed in the way that the original intentions were. It didn't become strictly an indigenous campground, but indigenous people were very active in it from then on. And it was almost 2 years before that campaign went on for 2 years. So that ad, I think, gets credit for a successful 2-year movement, which completely prevented Alcatraz from becoming another corporate commercial dominated area. So that was a very successful campaign. There are no victories, only holding actions. There's no permanent victory. All we can do is hold them off as much as we possibly can. Well, the alternative is to not keep going. And I think that that's just ridiculous and unnecessary and fatal and suicidal. We have to use whatever powers we can manage and that we can manage to create, and as much support as we can manage to develop, to keep on pushing and to help the changes that we think are necessary. I do think, I'll go so far as to say that I think recent movements have slowed down the worst kind of developments that were possible and still might happen. But I think we have gained a lot of impact over the recent years. I think that there's greater knowledge now in the general public, and especially among movements, of the importance of environmental values and environmental situations. There's a higher general understanding of the crucial importance of all that, and more people engaged in that. That's a big deal. It didn't have to happen like that. And I think that's a great success story. As to what happens in the future is very hard for me to say. I don't know. We have to keep it up. That's all I know.
Thank you, Jerry. Your work, it was such a great pleasure to do that interview with you. And your work, wisdom, and stories have had an enormous impact on so many people and social movements across the world. And now, before we dive into the issues and activism, we want to share a bit about the making of this unique book and its artistic and historical significance. First of all, congrats to everyone at Synergetic Press, Sandy Balin, Jasmine Verdi, and Amanda Moeller for the beautiful design and production of the book. And now I want to introduce a short recording by the editor of the book, Carrie Pilto. Carrie Pilto is an independent art historian and curator based in Amsterdam. Previously, she served as director of Musée Matisse in France, project assistant curator at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and managing editor of Point d'Irony in Paris. She obtained her master's degree in art history from the Sorbonne, and she has contributed to many books and exhibitions, most recently the book, The Museum of Mistakes. And she is currently curating an exhibition titled Values, Investing in the 21st Century at the Tropen Museum in Amsterdam. Peter, I hand it back to you.
Hello, everyone. Jerry Mander and I met when he was writing the Capitalism Papers, and I was working as a curator at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. We became friends, and a few years later, he asked me if I'd like to curate an exhibition of his ad collection to show in museums. Well, nothing excites me more than discovering a secret collection or a virgin archive. But I moved to Europe. So in 2017, Jerry got on a plane and brought the entire ad archive here to Amsterdam in his suitcases. Here he is, arriving at the hotel after flying all night, but he's so excited to get started that he begins unpacking the ads in the lobby. At my home here, we unrolled and disentangled them, literally and figuratively, and I began organizing them and assessing their condition. I discovered about 120 ads, mostly printer's proofs or velox, covering all of the themes that Jerry selected for the book, but also some other very moving ads that you won't see, like those created during the AIDS crisis and one defending Black-owned family farms in America. Jerry got me really fired up listening to his stories of the campaigns, and I devised a digital inventory, a spreadsheet, with an array of 17 columns of info to fill in for each ad, which I deemed necessary for any museum presentation. But Jerry was skeptical of finding all that data. His files from the 3 San Francisco ad agencies were long gone. So he left the ads with me while he went home to write and design the book with graphic designer Daniela Sklan. So what did I discover? Let me begin by stating the obvious. The work of a nonprofit ad writer or designer is anonymous. For the ads to work, their creators need to disappear behind the client and the cause. They are ghostwriters and ghost designers, unsung and unrecorded. Let me just quote some of the reactions to my first inquiries about dates and names with former agency colleagues. No one cataloged public media center work, largely because we were too busy doing it. No ad agency thinks about their art in that way, particularly a small, scrappy, continually overworked public interest group. The luxury of academic art history research is 1,000 miles away. So I turned to the internet, began juggling online newspaper archives and speaking to librarians around the world, bless them, and as a last resort, sat down with the dreaded microfilm reader. But the best part of the research was the help and solidarity from Jerry's former colleagues at Public Media Center, IFG, and the Turning Point Project. To name a few, Jono Polanski, Barbara Grobe, Katie Kleinsasser, Susan Alexander, Elizabeth Garsonen, Victor Minotti, and Andrew Kimbrell, as well as all the designers whose names now happily appear in the credits. So what did we find together? Some numbers. Of the 70 ads in the book, 50 were penned by Jerry himself and 15 by Jono Polanski, the lead copywriter for Public Media Center. There's also one by the legendary Howard Gossage, Jerry's mentor. That leaves 2 by client authors and 2 nobody could agree on, left anonymous. So the earliest ad in the book dates from 1963. It's one of the hilarious commercial ads written by Gossage titled The Land Rover and Crime. We can see it as a design template for many of the nonprofit ads to come, with its classic typeface, newspaper-like columns, multiple subheadings and illustrations, and the all-important return coupon calling the reader to action. And the last ad in the book, Techno-Utopianism, written by Jerry, appeared in the New York Times on August 28, 2000. It's one of the 25 Turning Point Project ads, a series conceived to promote public awareness of the most pressing issues facing life on Earth. So to conclude, Jerry's archive is unique as far as I know, and the first attempt to compile a history of this genre. Without his efforts, much of this history would have been lost. Until now, because of their hybrid nature, black and white aesthetic, and publication in ephemeral mediums, the ads have by and large escaped collection by museums of art and design. But now, as museum curators begin to focus on social justice and the environment, and less on the evolution of forms, these ads will become valuable additions to their collections. I hope that Jerry's memoir and the credits at the back of this book can provide a solid resource for collecting and exhibiting these ads, and a jumping off point for future scholars.
Wonderful. And now it is my honor and pleasure to introduce our esteemed guests from 6 time zones. First, we have Annie Leonard, who's zooming in from the Bay Area. She is the co-executive director of Greenpeace USA. Prior to this role, she was the founder of the Story of Stuff project and author of the book. Annie has spent 2 decades working on international sustainability and environmental issues. She traveled to 40 countries, conducting research, collecting interviews, and documenting impacts along the way. During this time, she worked for various environmental organizations, including Greenpeace International, Gaia, and Healthcare Without Harm. She is on the boards of Wallace Global Fund, the Story of Stuff Project, Inequity Media Project, and Public Citizen. She's on the advisory board of the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center in the US. Currently, she is partnering with Jane Fonda on the Fire Drill Fridays project, and she is co-founder of Families for a Future, a new campaign platform designed to reach the 70% of the US public who are now worried about climate change, but not yet active. Annie has received many awards and honors for her important work. We are honored to have her here today. And now I hand the mic to you, Annie. Peter, she might need you to unmute her. Okay, there we go.
Thank you. I could not unmute myself. Thank you so much. It is such a pleasure to be here. I'm echoing many of the comments that were in the chat and that others have said about the impact that Jerry had on me. Jerry is an intellectual giant. He is a mentor, and he is also my friend. Jerry did those ads for Greenpeace in the 80s and the 90s, over 30 years ago now, right at the time that I had entered Greenpeace as a young toxics campaigner. And so I sort of came of age as an activist in the milieu of these ads. And it wasn't really until much, much later that I realized how much my understanding of the world and my ideas about campaigning came from working with Jerry. I just want to give 3 quick examples. One is about people power.
Uh-oh.
Annie, I think you've frozen up.
Hi, my name is Annie Leonard, and I am the co-executive director of Greenpeace. I apologize that my internet cut out, of all things, during a tribute to the man who critiques technology more than anybody. But I'm back, and I'm so excited to share some thoughts about Jerry and his book. Jerry Mander has been a mentor, a co-conspirator, and a friend of mine for about 3 decades. I've been doing environmental work for over 30 years, and I realized how much of my understanding of how the world works and how change happens comes from Jerry. So thank you, Jerry. I was a young campaigner at Greenpeace in the late 80s and early 90s when Jerry did the ads for Greenpeace, and they had a huge impact on both the organization and on my own development as a young activist. There's 3 things in particular that I learned from Jerry and his ads that I want to share today. The first is that people power works. People power is all the rage these days, and some young activists think this is an internet-enabled tactic, but not so. Jerry's ads laid the foundation for Greenpeace's embrace of people power and helped me personally understand how powerful collective action is when you can reach and mobilize lots of people. That was hard before the internet, but Jerry figured out how to get powerful messages in front of millions of eyeballs, and not just messages, but also calls to action. Those little coupons in his ads, they facilitated people sending their voice to decision makers in both business and government at an unprecedented level. And they also allowed Greenpeace to grow. Whenever one of his ads came out for Greenpeace, we got thousands and thousands of letters, thousands of new members that wanted to be a part of a movement. And so I really can say Greenpeace is what it is today, in thanks to the work that Jerry did to help us reach and recruit so many people. So that's number 1 I learned from him, is that people power or collective action, it works. Second thing I learned from Jerry is to say the truth. Jerry's ads did not dumb down anything. Those ads spoke truth to power, and they worked. They didn't do A/B testing. They didn't tone things down. Jerry always said what needed to be said, and then said it well. I remember the editor of our magazine saying that no one had summarized the political situation around the bombing of Greenpeace's ship, the Rainbow Warrior, like Jerry's famous ad about why they blew up the Rainbow Warrior. Please check it out in this book. The third thing that I learned from Jerry is to ignore the rules. Jerry's ads ignored every single rule that I have been taught in decades of activist communications. The ads were long. They left little white space on the page. The design was not particularly artistic. The print was small and the words were big, but somehow they worked. And that level of rich, deep discourse is something that we're missing as a country today. So thank you, Jerry, for your ads, for helping Greenpeace build our people power. Thank you, Synergetic Press, for making these ads and all this history available to everybody. And thank you, City Lights, for pulling us together today.
Well, then let's move on. It's my honor to introduce Meenakshi Raman, who's zooming in from Malaysia. She is a lawyer and expert on climate change, especially on global negotiations, including the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, and the Green Climate Fund. Meena is also one of the pioneers who helped set up a network of environmental lawyers around the world called Environmental Lawyers Alliance Worldwide, or ELAW, which helps support environmental activism, while using law as a tool. Currently, Meena is the president of Sahabat Alam Malaysia, a well-known environmental NGO based in Penang, which works with many grassroots communities, including indigenous peoples, fisher folk, farmers, rural communities, and more. Also, she is a legal advisor to the Consumers Association of Penang, a well-known NGO that is advancing the rights and well-being of consumers. In addition, she is head of programs of Third World Network, an international organization based in Penang. And from 2004 to 2008, Meena served as the chair of Friends of the Earth International, which is an international environmental justice organization with 72 member groups around the world. These are just a few of her many accomplishments. We are honored to have Meena here today. Meena, I hand the mic to you.
Thank you very much. It's really the honor and privilege is mine. Good evening to all of you. It's good morning here in Malaysia, which is actually Thursday morning. I hope you will not have any interruptions, because for the last 1 hour, everything was fine. And suddenly some work has been, hacking and drilling going on in one of the apartments. So forgive me, I've told them to stop, but this is what modern life is, as Jerry well knows. Now, how did I get to know Jerry? Well, it's really one of the nicest stories. I think Jerry and my late husband, Martin Kaur, go a very, very long way. In the late 1990s, in the last 1997 and onwards, we used to go to San Francisco quite a lot. My own husband, Martin Kaur, was then head of Third World Network. He used to love City Lights and visit the bookshop very often. And Jerry was one of his best friends in the world. And I think what that led to was a wonderful group, the International Forum on Globalization, which is mentioned in the 70 Ads book. And it's quite an amazing achievement, because I myself was a young activist at that time. And since we were dealing with a big, giant World Trade Organization, nobody thought we could stop them from moving forward, but we did. And I think one of the reasons for that was the wonderful teachings that IFG, and under the guidance and inspiration of Jerry, did in Seattle, which led to the collapse of the WTO talks. Unimaginable as it would be that we could actually defeat this huge monster, which was actually writing rules for governments to deregulate, to essentially let corporations get away with anything under the sun, including, destroying societies and the planet, which is a corporate venture which continues today. Now, the battle for Seattle, and many of us were part of that, those teachings were incredible. And Jerry's ads, that ad that on the WTO and the way in which corporate globalization moves, were very instrumental in making many, many people aware. And Jerry, one of the challenges for us today is that all that wonderful, rich ads in the book got me thinking about how do you actually convert them to TikTok and other media today. This incredible rich inventory there, which is really valuable for the kind of international mobilization of groups in the north, groups in the south. We are all fighting the same systemic causes of fighting capitalism and neoliberalism, an issue which continues to grapple and make the world even worse as the day goes by. We all know about the climate change crisis and how we are the planet is actually on an existential threat. So the work that IFG and Jerry and others have done has been incredible. And for me, as part of the family, it was really wonderful. Coming together with Jerry and friends, including in celebrating our marriage, Martin and my marriage. They celebrated beautifully, calling us together. And it was a family. It was a family not only of thinkers around the world, of the global North and South coming together. It was a thought space. It was an activist space. It was a space where we would generate ideas and think of campaigning against the biggest corporate players. Now we dream on, and Jerry said, keep it up. Yes, we have to keep it up. We have to inspire more people. Jerry, you have been an inspirer for many, many people around the world, including in our part of the world. But the biggest lesson, I think, is in connecting the struggles of the North to the global South. And I think that is a very valuable lesson. The IFG may not be very strong today, but indeed we do need, it has inspired many, many movements, many, many climate justice groups, state justice movements around the world. And with this, I am so happy and honored to have known you, Jerry, and look forward to getting a hard copy of that wonderful book, and look forward to one day actually visiting you, if ever that was possible, if not for the pandemic. And of course, if Martin was alive, he would say, Jerry, give you one big hug, because you are a true friend and a real global friend for international solidarity and for justice, social justice around the world. So thank you, Jerry, for being part of us, and we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much, Meena. Our next guest is Palikapu Dedman, who's zooming in from Hawaii. It's a great honor to have him here. He is a longtime Kanaka Maoli rights activist, and I apologize if I did not say that properly. I've tried. And he is the president and co-founder of the Pele Defense Fund. He is a resident of the Big Island of Hawaii. Aloha, Palikapu. I hand the mic to you.
Oh, aloha. Hey, proud to be here. It was in the mid-'80s that I met Jerry. He came to Hawaii and with our issue fighting Kaho'olawe with the Navy bomb. And was my partner, Emmett Aluli, said he'll bring Jerry to the Big Island because we started to get involved with geothermal development. It was a state project, and they were using taxpayers' money to promote this drilling of geothermal. And I'm from the Big Island. My family has Pele names. We're a Pele clan, and that was the volcano that they were drilling into. So we as natives had to stand up to protect that concept of the believing and all spirituality. So when Jerry came, he embraced it, and next thing you know, we're in San Francisco at Public Media Center and started to put everything together. And his ad was the key for us to open it to the world. I mean, he only told the truth. So you really couldn't argue against anything. He was very truthful and everything. And the ad gave us an opportunity, the little people, to speak to the world. It's emotional, of course. It was a tough journey. Just being a native, no PhD degree, just living off the land, the ocean, trying to protect the whole colonialist history of Hawaii. So he showed me in the ad how to be good about protecting this and that, be accurate, how to talk to the world. And which it did. It opened up big opportunities. We got involved with the Rainforest Action Network in San Francisco, Randy Hayes. you know, the ad opened everything. I mean, 10 million in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, and Los Angeles newspapers just exposed the whole boondoggle, they call it, of using taxpayers' money to become the first utility company in Hawaii. So what we believe was sacred, let's drill it, put a meter on it, and sell it. And at the same time in that area, ocean mining was being looked at because of manganese nodules right off the Puna coast was going to be mined to make cobalt. So there was the energy source, as well as the lie that it was going to go all the way to Oahu, 500 megawatts. So that would have took up the whole rainforest in these power plants. But as it started with geothermal, Pele erupted in their first project, which was next to the volcano. So we already were encouraged that, hey, she believes, we just gotta believe. Then it moved down to Wild Kelly Forest, so they would start there. The state was really using Danny Noy with the federal funding in Washington to cover a lot of this money being spent, because it would be a $3 billion project, and the bonds was coming from Danny Noy in Washington. So in fighting this project, which never happened, they would have stuck our grandchildren with a bond that they would have to pay on a back to the feds on something that never really happened. I mean, that ad exposed so much of the government and how it's being run here. And you know, we're not being asked if we want to assimilate. We just are forced to assimilate. So there's a whole different attitude about who understands that and who don't. And with Christianity in Hawaii as a history, indigenous people and their connections to the forest and to the ocean, to the reefs, that's not looked at. That turns into different things like recreation. And a spirituality box on the box of our ad, in a box with our faces, told people with real face that this is our spiritual beliefs. It's not talking to a lot of people who don't believe that way, but those who do, that box was explaining to you, as well as another box about endangered species, that things will lose forever in this forest if it being developed. Then the rest of the ad all talked about the economics of it, the use of taxpayers' money, how they wouldn't get cheap electricity. So it covered everything, this ad, and it touched anybody who read it on what interest they had. And that ad would do that. And cutting out those coupons, you gotta know that as time went, I think about 6 months after that ad, we're in Washington, DC, and we got connections, doors open to Greenpeace. And they had a governor's convention going on in Washington. So when we went to Greenpeace, they said that they would go down to the Capitol where they were having their conference, and they protested about the rainforest and how they want to take it out. And we ran into the governor in an elevator. We didn't know we're in the same hotel. And he looked at us, he knew who Emmett was. And he said, hey, what are you guys doing? I was the only governor being protested in Washington. And it was because of this ad and its connection and the doors it opens. And I'm just saying that if it wasn't for that, I don't know where we'd be. So, you know, I owe you, Jerry, big time. You just didn't stop a project. You instill good. You still us, I won't change. I'll never go back. I'll think and be indigenous. till I pass. I owe you big time. Get emotional because that's how the whole thing was. It wasn't really Western where you just paint and hold signs and protest. We went to court, you got to show all these feelings, you got to have witnesses, but the doors open from that ad. And I don't know anybody else in Hawaii ever did that, which I don't think they did. And it cost the Visitors Bureau thousands of dollars, 200,000 to counter the ad of what was created. And his connections to the people that we got connected to, you just got to know that it's more than just an ad.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. Aloha.
I think aloha. You have expressed emotion that I think we're all feeling tonight. Many of us are feeling, and thank you for sharing that incredible story and being so open and heartfelt. It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Appreciate it too. Thank you.
Next, I'm honored to introduce, well, first a quick announcement. Annie Leonard, the internet went out in her entire house, unfortunately. We're hoping she might be able to join us later, so we will see. But now I'd like to take the moment to introduce Tom Butler. Tom is zooming in from Vermont. He is a conservationist and writer who presently serves as senior fellow at Northeast Wilderness Trust. He is the author, editor, and co-editor of more than a dozen books, including Wildlands Philanthropy, Plundering Appalachia, and Protecting the Wild and Energy, Overdevelopment and the Delusion of Endless Growth. Tom co-curated the 2017 exhibit, Douglas R. Tompkins on Beauty, at the David Brower Center in Berkeley, and co-authored the companion book on beauty, Douglas R. Tompkins, Aesthetics and Activism, about the way that beauty was an animating force in the life and work of Doug Tompkins, co-founder of Tompkins Conservation. Tom is a former editor of the Wild Earth Journal, a founding board member and past president of Eastern Wilderness Trust, and former vice president for conservation advocacy for Tompkins Conservation. He currently serves on the boards of Tompkins Conservation and Northern Forest Atlas Project. Tom, I hand the mic to you.
Jerry and Kuan and all the folks assembled tonight, such a pleasure, a real honor to be with you. My years working with Douglas and Christine Tompkins at the Foundation for Deep Ecology did not directly overlap with Jerry's time there on staff, but he was, of course, a co-founder and was wildly influential to all of us associated with the Foundation, and with so many countless individuals engaged in social change movements over the past few decades. Actually, as a young activist, I had first became aware of Jerry when I read In the Absence of the Sacred, which blew my mind. And then when I had the opportunity to meet Jerry in person at a Foundation-sponsored gathering, I was mesmerized by the fact that Jerry was as brilliant in person as he was on the page. And then to top all that off, there was the hair. The absolutely incredible, mesmerizing, incredible hair then and now. So I became a Jerry Mander super fan, and that fandom has been growing for decades, and it's continuing with the publication of this brilliant new book, 70 Ads to Save the World, which is such a treasure, very astute, marvelously insightful, as well as quite entertaining. Chapter 4 of the new book covers that Turning Point project that we've heard mention of already tonight. It was conceived by Doug Tompkins, Jerry Mander, and Andy Kimbrell. And this was, of course, a series of full-page ads that ran every other week in the New York Times for a year at the turn of the millennium. And the breadth of that series, covering various facets of the extinction crisis, the tragedy of industrial agriculture and industrial forestry, the emerging structures of corporate economic globalization, then in ascendance at the time, all of these things. It was a tour de force of deep systemic critique of the techno-industrial growth economy. And unlike some of these other ads we've heard discussed, and you'll see in the book, stop this particular dam proposal or that particular bad policy, here was something that was wildly ambitious. It was about essentially a culture jamming exercise, an exercising in cognitive monkey wrenching, as it explored week after week the causes and the consequences of this dominant worldview, the worldview of human supremacy. And in hindsight, we see, looking back on that Jerry and Andy, Kimbrell, Doug, and others in their cohort were really decades ahead of their time in linking these disparate issues and calling out the worldview that was behind them. So for sure, Jerry Mander's use of modern advertising techniques to help advance and catalyze social change movements has changed history for the better. But I think that his vision and work that is represented in this book is not just a fun memoir about the past. It's really calling us to a better future and calling us to engage in the way he did with creativity and artistic engagement, melding that with activism. So he challenges us really to be the kinds of activists that he has been, to be advancing the good and resisting the bad with joy, really, and with bravery and with brilliance, and if we can, topped with great hair. So thank you, Jerry, for your work, for this new book, for your vision, and most of all, for your inspiration to march into the future with style and courage.
Thank you so much, Tom. And you reminded me of something that I just still love. Those of us who worked with Jerry had sign language for him, and this is what it was. Because of his hair. Those of you who maybe couldn't see me, I was twirling my hand around my head to represent Jerry's hair. So now we are honored to show a recording from Dr. Vandana Shiva, sent all the way from India. Dr. Vandana Shiva is an author, physicist, ecologist, and advocate for biodiversity conservation and farmers' rights. Her pioneering work around food sovereignty, traditional agriculture, and women's rights created fundamental cultural shifts in how the world views these issues. Along with Jerry Mander, Edward Goldsmith, Ralph Nader, and Jeremy Rifkin, Dr. Shiva was a leader and board member of the International Forum on Globalization and a prominent figure of the global solidarity movement known as the Alter Globalization Movement. Dr. Shiva founded Navdanya, an organization that promotes agroecology, seed freedom, and a vision of earth democracy, seeking justice for the earth and all living beings. She has authored more than 20 books, including Reclaiming the Commons, Biodiversity, Indigenous Knowledge, and Agroecology, and Regenerative Agriculture, Sustainable Solutions for Hunger, Poverty, and Climate Change, published this year by Synergetic Press. Dr. Shiva has received numerous awards and honors, and she's the subject of an award-winning 2021 documentary, Seeds of Vandana Shiva. Peter, I hand it to you.
To all of you who have gathered to celebrate the life of Jerry Mander, his creativity in his collection of public advertising. Jerry is among the most brilliant people I have worked with and know. It has been an honor to be part of the International Forum on Globalization, which he and Doug Tompkins created. Brought together the movements from across the world who were seeing how corporate globalization was a new colonialism. And we joined together. We became the other voice. We became the people's voice from across the world. And Jerry didn't just bring us together. He brought new imagination together. His advertisements are a story of our time. They tell us how every gain for the people has been a people's movement gain along with his creativity. His advertisements are the creative history, the democracy of this age. He has lived a long life. We celebrate Jerry, we celebrate his ads, we celebrate his gifts to all of us. We celebrate a healthy future for Jerry. With love, dear Jerry, thank you so much for what you have given all of us.
Wonderful. So now we're going to take a moment to let a couple people say a few words. I want to acknowledge that Dr. Emmett Alule is here. And Dr. Alule, if you want to say a few words, please send me a message in the chat and I will call on you. And thank you for being here. And now I would like to introduce Debbie Barker. Debbie worked with Jerry as the co-director of the International Forum on Globalization. Later, she became the international director at the Center for Food Safety. She is currently working with the center on a project that will be taking her to Egypt this November for COP27, the International Climate Conference. Debbie, please feel free to say a few words.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is just, it's so many of you that I love so dearly. And Jerry, we love you so much. And I could go on and on with the stories, and it was what 10 years plus of IFG. But first, I did want to start by acknowledging someone who made this, without which this book wouldn't have happened, and that's Daniela Sklan. She did all the graphic design, not only on Public Media Day, she's worked with Jerry since that time and did many of those ads, did all of our graphic design for IFG and Center for Food Safety even, and carrying on. And she worked for Jerry for a few years on this book before there was a publisher and knew what would happen with it. So I think Daniela's on the call. So I think we all should be really grateful and say a huge thanks to Daniela. She's a beautiful designer. Yeah, just to say, again, there's so much can be said about the history, about the privilege of working with Jerry and all of the people that we worked with together especially in the days of International Forum on Globalization. The thing I just maybe wanted to say is that, even in those days, Twitter wasn't around, I don't think, or TikTok and all of these, get your message out now. Activists feel like you can only have, 10 words or something. But even in those days of the IFG, the media experts or advisors, when we do our full page ads in the New York Times or full page posters with lots and lots of text explaining this very complicated issue of economic globalization, and they're like, no, it's way too wordy and things. And Jerry's like, baloney. I mean, that wasn't the word he used, but he's like, that's ridiculous. You can't start a movement with, people need to understand the problem, understand the complication and the connections and the links of all these issues. And I think that's still a lesson for us today. Very apropos, I'm working on a brochure that we're going to take to, with Andy and Daniela, actually, that we're going to take to COP27 in Egypt, and talking about, complicated issues and trying to make it digestible enough for people to read and keep their attention. But yet, as time goes on, I'm more and more convinced that if we really want systemic change on these issues, that we do have to really articulate the problems in a very thorough way, help people have thorough understandings and the connections and the links. And that's something that I really one of the many, many things I learned from Jerry, I hope, or I'm still trying to learn, and go forward with that as a lesson from him. So as I say, that was just, there are many things to say, and so many, the IFGers, and it kind of took a village really to get this published. We all kind of came together and found the publisher. So anyway, it as Meena said, the IFG is not really a formalized group right now, but it started so many movements and it still maintains a lot of relationships. And this book really was something that kind of really came out of relationships between the IFG and ultimately to get it published, I should say. And the book is just, as you all know, beautiful. It's just a history, really, not only of these great ads and how they changed issues, but a history of the environmental movement that I think is just going to be key to history writ large. So again, love you, Jerry. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's so great to see you. It's been decades. Great to see you, and so wonderful to see so many colleagues from FDE and IFG here. Yeah. And also, thank you for acknowledging Daniela. You know, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that so many people were involved with all these ads and the making of the book. We just want to apologize that we're not able to acknowledge everyone, but we really hope we've covered, you know, some of the most key players. So. And we have one more special guest, and then we are going to have some time for Q&A. So I'd like to introduce Andrew Kimbrell. He worked with Jerry on many IFG projects. He's an internationally recognized public interest attorney, a public speaker, and author. He is the founder and executive director of the Center for Food Safety. And he's also the director of the San Francisco-based Center for Technology Assessment and co-founder of Foundation Earth. Andrew, would you like to say just a few words?
Yeah, it's so great to see you, Jerry, and Kuhan, and all my friends and colleagues, so many friends and colleagues. It's Meena, I just haven't had the chance to tell you how much I miss Martin Core, my friend for so many years, and almost a brother, really. So many of us have worked so many years. I'm not sure I'm into the hair thing. I get it, Tom. I'm not sure that was ever the big thing for me. But I do remember, Jerry, you years ago, along with Tell Me the Marshall McLuhan story, which is tremendous. If people, you know, you just covered it briefly, but it's a great story how you guys basically invented Marshall McLuhan, which is tremendous. Is that you said, you know, Howard Gossage would, you know, if people would start nitpicking his ads, you go, hey, where were you when the paper was blank? And I have to tell you, I use that with my staff all the time. If I do an article and an essay, I recommend it to everyone. You know, when somebody's nitpicking, hey, that's great, but where were you when the paper was blank? Because that's creativity that takes it. I owe you more than I can say, Jerry. In 1994, I wanted to do something about technology, and it was your brilliance and working with you and our beloved Doug Tompkins, who I so wish was here on this call, more than I can again say. You know, we created the International Center for Technology Assessment, which became the ultimate home for the Turning Point Project through your brilliance. And that's one thing I really want to say. You know, one of the great gifts and brilliances of Jerry, and the 4 Arguments Against Television, if you haven't read it, you should, is that he understood, like few others, I would bring into that group, definitely Ted Rozak and E.F. Schumacher, that regardless of your economy, capitalist, communist, socialist, is the technology stupid. If they're all using technologies that more and more rapidly transform the elements of the earth into products, regardless of the economic or bureaucratic ways that that's done, faster than the earth can regenerate itself, it is a recipe for scarcity, extinction, ultimately, regardless of the economic system. Yes, corporations are terrible, but so are bureaucracies that do it. It's the technology. And that's the insight that Jerry brought, and that, you know, hopefully I've been able to continue, and others, that the progressive movement so often forgets. And it was absolutely critical to the turning point ads. It was actually that perspective, whether it be computers, whether it be industrial agriculture, whether it be nuclear power, whatever it was, that was so critical. The technology, regardless of the economic system, is what is destroying the planet, which is killing the earth. So, Jerry, you were an evangelist for that. I'm not sure we yet have reached the turning point on that. I hope we will. I hope we will, on that. I want to just, and everything I've done since then, all the litigation, Supreme Court, all that began because Jerry and Doug Tompkins supported me on that, including Fatal Harvest, the book, and everything else. And I'm just incredibly grateful for that. But I wanted to at least quickly say a couple of stories on this. One is that when Jerry and Doug first came up with the idea of spending all this money on these ads, I said, let's not do that. I'm an organizer. Let's wait till the issues come to the fore, whether it be industrial agriculture or the problem of computers in schools. Let's wait and do the ads at that time. It made sense to me. Why are you doing it all, this sort of every couple of weeks thing, right? And I was short-sighted because what happened was that Jerry and Doug had this vision that they were synergistic. And, Jerry grew up in Yonkers, New York. I grew up in Queens. The New York Times is the newspaper of record, and it did not reflect our views. I think I had one editorial in my entire life published in the New York Times, and they never published any of my letters to the editor. But here, our view, this revolutionary worldview, right, was going to be over and over put into full-page ads in the New York Times. And they were synergistic. They added more and more and more to the understanding of the toxic nature of our technology and on our economy, on the planet, and on our, not just nature, but also on human nature. And that synergism was just, I had underestimated that. And it was such a powerful vision. And it's one of the great accomplishments, along with being part of the IFG and the other work I've done. It's one of my proudest things to work with Jerry. And it's also phenomenal fun. Can you imagine knowing what you're saying is not just something you're going to talk over at a conference call? It's going to be in the New York Times next couple of weeks. I mean, in a full page ad, how exciting is that? And I'll never forget going down to Pumalin and laying all of them out. Doug Tompkins had taken all the furniture out of the dining room, and there they were, all 15. And remember, Doug was not only a great intellect, but also a wonderful designer, Doug Tompkins. And he looked at all of them. And Jerry and I were a little concerned because was he going to start nitpicking with various words? But no, he saw it all. And I could just see, that's it. We've got it. And with the great help of people who've been mentioned before, Daniela and PMC, by the way, and Herb Gunther, and so many other brilliant people, and Elizabeth Garson, and all of them. It was a tremendous accomplishment. So I'm proud of it to this day. I'm delighted. Thank you for all those who made this book come to pass. And Jerry, I look forward to being out in the Bay Area in December and meeting in person. And thank you again, my beloved friend.
Thank you, Andrew. It's so good to see you after all these years.
And you as well, Julie.
Thank you. We have one more guest, special guest tonight. Dr. Emmett Alule is here all the way from Hawaii. Aloha, Dr. Alule. Peter is going to find you and unmute you so that you can say just a few words.
Thank you. So, aloha, Jerry. And if Colette was here with us today, she would say the same. Aloha from Molokai and Kaho'olawe. And Palikapu tells a story that he did when Waukeleopuna Forest was dedicated to Hawaii. Trust for Public Lands was able to find the money to buy the forest. And now it's going to be ceded over to recognized Native Hawaiian governance when we get it. But Jerry, you brought the sacred to the presence. And that's the most important thing for me that you've done for the people of Hawaii and the indigenous people of this world. They recognize sacredness in nature. You raised that bar for us. And the other thing is after Palikapu gave his talk in Waukeleopuna, Senator Dan Inouye came up to me and said, he apologized. He said, I never knew, but it was you that convinced him. Thanks, Jerry. Mahalo. See you soon. Aloha.
Thank you, Dr. Alule. Thank you, everyone. This has been beyond my expectations, an incredibly heartfelt and emotional event for many of us, I think. We want to thank all our esteemed guests from zooming in from literally 6 time zones. And Jerry, we love you. And we are so happy to be able to celebrate with you tonight. I'd like to hand the mic back to Peter. Well, actually, if there are any questions, this is your last chance to post them in the chat. If not, I'm going to hand the mic back to Peter Maravelis so he can say some final words. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everybody. It doesn't look like we have many questions, but we've got a lot of wonderful testimonials. And if anybody would like a copy of tonight's chat, you just email me at peter@citylights.com and I'm happy to make a copy. I'm making one for Jerry too. Really wonderful, wonderful moment, and very emotionally moving. I really want to thank Julie for doing the honors, to all of our participants for joining us from time zones from around the globe. A deep, deep offering of thanks and respect. Yeah, there are actually, now they're popping in. Okay, so well, before we sign out, let's
Sharon Donovan. Hello, Sharon.
Yeah, there we go.
So good to see you here tonight. Let's see, the question, maybe Meena or Tom could answer this question. It is about how the ads affected policy. Or Andrew Kimbrell and Debbie, if you want to drop.
I can't speak to the Turning Point ads about a policy link, but I certainly, and many of us on the phone know, and as Meena said, the ads that we did about the WTO in the run-up and during the time of what led to the Battle of Seattle, I mean, that just stopped the agenda of the WTO in its tracks, and it still has not recovered from that. So it gives me hope and a pattern of how to build a movement. I feel like that's what I hopefully learned from Jerry, or I know he knew how to build a movement, you know, and part of that again were these ads and educating people and really linking all the issues. You saw a movement like from nothing being manifested ultimately on the streets of Seattle. There were other victories in that time too, but that was definitely, those ads just made all the difference in stopping the WTO in its next level of agenda. So.
Thank you, Debbie.
Hi everyone. Nice to see everyone. Thank you, Debbie. That was great. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just sort of doing a little promotion around this event and Jerry's book, and actually raised that issue. I think you changed, Jerry certainly changed the discourse on globalization for sure.
Thank you, Sharon. And I think Andrew Kimbrell has his hand raised. Good to see you, Sharon.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, you know, it's hard to know now with all the problems we have with the GMOs. At that time, when those ads came out, GMOs are being touted as the future of all agriculture, of all food, of the solution to, you know, you name it, climate change. And the ad that we put out was the first in the New York, again, remember the New York Times saying this isn't going to work. It's based on bad science. It's corporate run. It's basically a technology to sell pesticides because they're just, all these GMO crops are just resistant to pesticides. So it was really the very first time anybody who read the New York Times saw it, because we couldn't get in the New York Times, said, hey, there's something wrong with this technology. It was, you know, it was, and the support we got from the, you know, from the community saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Finally, the truth is told. And it did that on computers in schools as well, by the way, which then since has become quite a movement. It really, really got that movement going. So yeah, lots of policy changes, lots of awareness, and not that, but lots of people who saw their views in the New York Times and felt empowered. These ads empowered, saying, yeah, that's what I've been saying, and now it's in the New York Times.
I love that. Thank you, Andrew. We have a very, very special guest here tonight. I'm going to take a moment to introduce her. Chris McDivitt Tompkins is here. Chris, it is so good to see you after all these years. Chris is the president and co-founder of Tompkins Conservation and the former CEO of Patagonia. For more than 25 years, she's worked to protect wild beauty and biodiversity by creating national parks, restoring wildlife, inspiring activism, and fostering economic vitality as a result of conservation. Through Tompkins Conservation and in collaboration with NGOs, governments, and philanthropists, Chris and her late husband, Doug Tompkins, have helped protect more than 14 million acres of parklands in Chile and Argentina. Chris, thank you so much for being here tonight, and we're very happy you're willing to say a few words.
Well, Jerry, I snuck in here. My question is really not a question, but I couldn't get in any other way. Really do know how much you are loved and how much you have taught us, and so much of what we've done over the last 30 years is really coming from the wellspring of your original thinking. I think in the first days that Doug decided to change the nature of his daily life and his work. So that's my question. But mostly, I just want to say how nice it is to see everybody. And I've been laying here in the dark for an hour listening, and it's really touching to hear about, you know, voices from Malaysia, from Hawaii, all over the place, and seeing old friends. And I just feel so grateful to have a stack of these books sitting on my desk, which are all going to Patagonia and all over the place. And I'm just very happy to join all of you. So Jerry, Kuhan, big kiss, enormous love and gratitude for decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm so happy you were able to say a few words. Thank you, thank you. Well, if anybody has any more messages to Jerry, please post them in the chat now. Just a reminder, we are going to save the chat and give it to Jerry. So it's like a huge card for him. So please do that now. There's also a link to buy books. Again, thank you. A million thanks to everyone. And I'm going to hand it back to Peter to close the evening's event.
Thank you, Julie. So once again, just such a deeply moving evening. Thank you all. It means so much to us. Also want to take a moment to thank everyone at Synergetic Press, who we've had a great pleasure of working with over the years. They know a good thing when they see it, and City Lights is grateful to them for publishing this wonderful tome. A big shout out to Sandy Balin, to Amanda Muller, Jasmine Verdi, and also Deborah Snyder, the director of Synergetic, for all of her good work. So tonight's event has been made possible by the support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events, a publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So Jerry, we love you. Kuhan, we love you too. Good night, everyone. Please take care. We hope to see you all again soon.